Thanks for tuning in Veterans Voices. I'm your host, Joshua Zebley, and my co-host is Elena Kim. Today we'll be talking about discharge upgrades. We have a panel of experts that will explain the process and share their experiences.
We want to start the show by hearing from Ezekiel Bodorf, a Marine veteran who had a discharge upgrade and now helps other veterans with the process. Let's take a look at my conversation with him. I'm talking with Ezekiel Bodorf. He's a Marine veteran who's now the Discharge Upgrade team lead with the Veterans Legal Institute. Ezekiel, can you tell me a little bit about your military career?
Well, my military career starts from when I was younger. My dad was an Army veteran, so I grew up as a Army brat myself. We moved around a little bit while I was younger and eventually landed in northwestern Arkansas. My parents wanted a better education, so we moved up to Wisconsin in the middle of winter, and I never adjusted to winter. So when I turned 20, I did the most practical thing somebody could do and joined the Marines. It took me out to San Diego. I became a 2844 ground organizational radio repairman, where I spent 5 years fixing broken communications equipment.
Wow, I love the term military brat because there's so much affection around there. So you grew up in a military family and it was almost your destiny to be on this path. But then things did take a turn at some point. So can you tell me a little bit about your discharge upgrade, the one that you experienced?
Well, absolutely. As all Marines do, we were doing PT one day, and I did something which my buddy didn't agree with, and I ended up tearing my meniscus about three-quarters of the way through. So for the last 6 months of my service, I was put on light duty, limited duty, and eventually I was starting the discharge out processing. And when I did finally receive my paperwork, they had given me a reenlistment code RE3P. And I, at one point in time, was thinking maybe I want to go back into service once the knee had healed. And I was denied. I talked to a recruiter and they're like, we can't take you back with this. So I had appealed to the Board of Naval Corrections, or excuse me, the Board for Correction of Naval Records, and they granted me my discharge upgrade, taking me from RE3P to RE1A.
And Ezekiel, for those of our viewers who aren't familiar, what are the reenlistment codes and why are they significant?
Well, reenlistment codes are an item that are listed on the DD 214, which give information to the individual branches about whether or not somebody, if they have been discharged, whether they can get back into service and what steps they would need to take. There are four generalized RE codes, but each branch has their own separate codification system. So having anything both sides, what is considered the most appealing, which is an RE1, you start to run into issues on reenlistment. So each branch has their own system. So they're usually codified in the Marine Corps. It's the Marine Corps orders, Army regulations, the Mills personnel manual for the Navy. Each of them kind of list out what somebody should receive and how it would affect their capabilities of returning to service.
This all sounds very complex. What are some of the situations that cause veterans to have less than an honorable discharge through no fault of their own?
Less than honorable discharges are actually a little bit more common than we would like to see. There's a long history of the discharge characterization process, which predates World War II from everything that I've looked into. But there are several things that could affect the individual veteran's rights and their ability to go and get a desirable, honorable discharge. Some things that have happened to veterans is they're going through some familial circumstance close to the end of service, and instead of receiving an honorable, they slip up, do something, a minor infraction, and they're given a general, which eliminates their capability of participating in the GI Bill. Other things that could happen, car accidents, injuries, and of course, military sexual trauma is a big one, which eventually leads to a veteran likely developing post-traumatic stress syndrome or other mental health conditions. And as a result of those,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
as a result of those, their command may look at their following actions and be punitive against the veteran for something that they didn't really have control over in the first place.
That makes sense.
Oh, Ezekiel, misinformation, that's another thing here. Can you explain that?
Misinformation comes into play whenever a command goes and provides any documents or comments to a veteran as they're being separated from service, whereby they say something that is knowingly inaccurate. One of the most common things that we hear is, in 6 months' time, this general will be upgraded to an honorable. It has been held by all of the boards that that just doesn't happen. In order for you to receive any benefits, it needs to come in for an application for a discharge upgrade. It doesn't happen automatically. And it's one of the biggest rumors that's out there that's just wrong. There's other information that they receive from the people who are separating them saying, oh, well, you'll still be entitled to your benefits, even though that's a categorically false statement. So a lot of veterans hear this and they take bad paper discharges as kind of an admission of fact. Like, this is how it'll be because it'll be fixed later and I won't have to do anything. So we see a lot of misinformation, and it's coming as a ruse in order to lure veterans into more of a safe spot to take bad papers.
Ezekiel, you're clearly an advocate helping veterans change their discharge status. Why is this process so important?
This process is important because there's a lot of things that we don't know while we're in service. There's things that I'm learning every day about our benefits, about our access to justice, and everything else that can be changed from a junk paper discharge. So the ability to go in and say, hey, this is not correct, and that I should have received this discharge as opposed to this charge. What we see is veterans who they lose access to certain benefits. Of course, the big one that everyone knows about is the GI Bill, but access to healthcare, access to the VA home loan, and all of these other things can be affected when the discharge isn't proper.
Ezekiel, thank you so much for sharing your personal story and connection to this. And of course, thanks for being on the show and everything that you do for our veterans.
You're welcome.
Now we want to have an in-depth conversation about discharge upgrades. I want to introduce our guest panel, Deepa Aurora of Swords to Plowshares, Caitlin Emmons, formerly with the Veterans Legal Institute and now with the Northwest Justice Project, and Jane Brunson with the Legal Aid of Sonoma County. Welcome to the show, team. Let's start off with you, Deepa. So we talked about it a little bit there with Ezekiel, but I think a lot of veterans really want to know, you get out, you get a specific character of discharge. Why should you be able to change that after it's all said and done?
That's a great place to start. So I think of it as two main pieces. One, the military can make mistakes. And that's a good reason to have a process where someone can review the discharge after the fact. And the second major reason is because there are circumstances and events that may not come up during the discharge process for a service member that might not be a part of the conversation or even understood at the time. But after the fact, that might be something that the veteran can talk about, can share, and it might be relevant to the misconduct in their record or the reason that they got a particular discharge status. And so again, it's an opportunity to have that conversation when there's more information, more context. And as an example, perhaps someone developed a mental health condition in service. They were unaware of that at the time. They didn't have a diagnosis. They didn't have the terminology to have a conversation about that. And maybe after service, they were able to access resources to learn more about that and better understand, the behavior in service that may have been understood as misconduct at the time.
Yeah, and I think, like Deepa was mentioning, sort of the evolution of the mental health, or our understanding of mental health has changed so significantly. So when you're looking at veterans who may have served prior to 9/11, there really wasn't a lot known about post-traumatic stress disorder. And it's not really until later that we begin to understand sort of the impact that can have, the impact that traumatic brain injury can have. And it's even later, but down to 2009 where the military actually starts screening people appropriately for those conditions. So you've got generations of service members who may very well have been suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder or traumatic brain injury who had no idea that was their diagnosis or their condition at the time. And it may take decades before they fully understand the ways that their behavior in service is connected to those conditions.
That's a great point, because I can see that the VA and Department of Defense is continuously making improvements on their systems and their processes, and for them to understand that these veterans, we hadn't seen a group of veterans that were in combat since Vietnam, and now we're seeing that this group coming out of the 9/11 era, that the VA is taking a look at that in Department of Defense and saying we need to really do something about this, because there's some cause to the actions that cause them to get a other than honorable discharge. And there, military sexual trauma, I think, is also in there. There's victims that may have, decided the best thing for them to do was to escape the military, to, turn to some type of substance. How about, are you seeing a lot of MST survivors they're coming in and say, this happened to me, and these are the results, and I ended up with a other than honorable discharge?
Yeah, when I was at Veterans Legal Institute with Ezekiel, that was my primary focus, was our military sexual trauma veterans. So we would see a lot of veterans who would experience that trauma, and we kind of had veterans who had been able to report it and kind of were able to process parts of it in the military, and then we had veterans who had never told anybody. I worked with a client who served during Vietnam. He'd never disclosed that he had been assaulted, whereas I had a veteran who got out in 1989 and had disclosed it. There had been a prosecution. Everything had been theoretically done right on paper in the criminal justice system for her, but she was never given therapy. So that caused her to begin to behave in ways that were not in line with the military's expectations, and ultimately resulted in her discharge with less than honorable terms.
Wow,
Yeah.
Jane, you're working with Legal Aid of Sonoma County, and I'm sure you're meeting with veterans daily, if not weekly. You're getting to hear some of the stories that veterans are coming to you with. I'm wondering, when you first meet with a veteran, are you hearing that, hey, this is an easy process for me, I knew that I wanted to give you a call and get this settled? Or is there some hesitation that you're experiencing before you even get into the conversation with a veteran about personal shame for even having this issue that they need help with?
Yeah, there's often a lot of hesitation and uncertainty. Sadly, many veterans, especially the veterans from past eras who are older now, they don't understand or realize that there are benefits that might be available to them and what those may be and how they can access them. So they often have just assumed for many years that there's nothing they can do and they can't get any benefits, and that's the way it is. So a lot of people are referred to us through organizations. They don't call us of their own accord, and they come in and get a hold of us and say, what could you even possibly do for me? So I have to do a lot of the education in that regard, to even give them hope that this is a possibility. And also, yeah, there is a great sense of personal shame and embarrassment and guilt that surrounds especially veterans who've gotten less than honorable discharges. Unfortunately, the discharge process can often feel very targeted, and they feel like they did something really wrong and there's no excuse for it, and they were punished, and they got their, they have no benefits now as a punishment for their actions, kind of a lifelong punishment. And that's very difficult psychologically and emotionally for someone to deal with and to admit what was really going on at that time, and to try and seek benefits, because it's been so internalized that they feel a lot of shame and guilt around the way their service ended.
So we're going to get really deep into discharge upgrades a little bit later in the show. But for now, can we talk a little bit about the different types of discharges, starting from honorable to dishonorable, and kind of some examples of what may a veteran or a service member, veteran, how they may have landed in that. What's the cause? So honorable, I think we got that. No, you had a fairly clean service record. I don't know what tips fairly clean to. Yeah, you might have done a couple of little things that people do, but it's not gonna get you a general discharge. So what really gets you to a general discharge?
There's a lot of discretion involved when we're talking about the difference between an honorable and a general, and what qualifies as, a minor incident or misconduct. But I can let Deepa. I think you were about to go, and I cut you off. But
No,
if you
you
want to
didn't.
explain it, yeah. But basically, it comes down to command discretion when you're talking about the difference between a general and an honorable, and sometimes also command discretion when it comes to an other than honorable, which is another characterization in there.
Caitlin, you took the words from my mouth. Really, that was exactly what I was thinking to talk about. And in addition to command discretion, and because of command discretion, you could also understand that from branch to branch, from era to era, there may be vast differences in misconduct that may lead to an honorable discharge versus a general other than honorable, or even a punitive discharge. So we've seen huge increases in other than honorable discharges in the more recent eras. That wasn't as common previously. And that has, huge implications, obviously. So really, when you think about what misconduct leads to a general or an other than honorable versus an honorable discharge, it may be, one time popping positive on a drug test, for example. For some folks, that's going to lead to a general discharge. For others, they might have an other than honorable. And that's where the discretion comes in. So it's hard to pinpoint and say, oh, this rises to the level that it will, inherently lead to a general or an other than honorable discharge. And the same goes for when you look at the punitive discharges, when you're talking about going through a court-martial proceeding, getting charged, convictions out of that may lead to a bad conduct or a dishonorable discharge. In the same way, you might see that command might decide, let's just administratively separate this service member. Let's write it up as an other than honorable and admin accept them. On the other hand, someone might charge and go through, take someone through a court-martial proceeding. And yes, between the bad conduct and the dishonorable discharges, or the types of court-martials, there are rules around that. What can be charged in different ways. But I think the main point really is to take away is that it's not inherently the case that you look at two veterans who, the same misconduct shows up and you're going to see the same discharge. That's just not the case.
I think that's another.
Go ahead, Jane.
I think that's one of the main reasons why it's so important to have a review process and appeals process for these discharges. I'll just explain the general discharge and the other than honorable discharge and kind of the difference between those and how they affect people. So a general under honorable conditions discharge, it's considered, honorable for VA purposes, pretty much mostly honorable. However, if you have a general discharge, you do not have access to the GI Bill, which is a huge education benefit, a big reason why a lot of veterans want to serve in the military. But with a general discharge, you do have access to a lot of these other benefits, the health care, the disability compensation, a lot of those things. Whereas an other than honorable discharge, you don't have access to any of those benefits unless you go through the upgrade process or other processes that are extra hoops to jump through and things to do to try and get those benefits. And really, like everyone is saying, your command, your superiors can just choose to give you either a general or other than honorable based on how bad they think your misconduct was at that time and place, right? So based on, whatever your commander thinks or feels about you and what you did and how to deal with you, they can really affect you for the rest of your life with access to these benefits or not.
Yeah, there's a lot of gray area there, and I think that's what we're really trying to tease out in the show is that maybe if you're a civilian sitting at home, or even another veteran, you might think like there's a list of things that you're gonna do that would get you this characterization, and then there's another list bucket where if you do these things, it'll be this characterization of discharge. But what I'm hearing you guys say is that there's so much gray area, and so much depends on even that relationship that you have with your chain of command, which, as Josh and I know as veterans, like it differs from one base to the next, from one unit to the next, and also whether or not combat was involved here. You know, you might have one relationship when you go to war, and then you might come back with a completely different relationship with your chain of command. I'm curious from anyone really quick if you have a story that you can share about a veteran that you've talked to where it wasn't so cut and dry, just to help us sort of, you know, put a person onto this concept.
I think almost all of the cases I have are not super cut and dry. When I think about a lot of the misconduct, especially in MST cases, sometimes, at least in my experience, the misconduct tends to kind of fall outside the realm of what we would normally consider a crime. So I've had cases where the misconduct was wearing yoga pants to the commissary, or losing their ID because it was tucked into a drawer. Little things like that, where it's almost as if there's a paper trail being created. Wow. So that they can then turn around and say it's a pattern of misconduct, which is 2 or more instances of misconduct in one enlistment. So those types of things.
Not vacuuming.
Not cleaning up well enough. Your shoe had a scuff on it. And while those are very serious things, and the military holds people to very high standards, I've seen them weaponized against frequently victims of MST or those struggling with mental health conditions.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. We're taking a brief break, but when we come back, we'll continue our conversation about discharge upgrades, so stay with us.
We all make more than 35,000 decisions a day. Most are small, but some can be life-changing.
When it comes to taking care of yourself, the most important choices can be hard to make. Like having a tough conversation instead of ignoring a buddy's call.
Or being there for support, not assuming things will just get better.
Or fighting through challenges rather than giving up.
And while we all face thousands of choices every day, there's one that can make all the difference. Today, make the decision to be there. For the veterans in your life, for your community, for yourself. Learn more at BeThereForVeterans.com.
Welcome back to Veterans Voices. We were talking about filing an application for a discharge upgrade. So last segment we spoke about the different types of discharge and how, you know, we're working together to help these veterans get a discharge upgrade. And one thing that stuck in my head was you all mentioned that there's no list of, if you did this, you're getting other than honorable, you're getting a BCD, or you're getting a dishonorable discharge, bad conduct discharge, or a dishonorable discharge. There's no list. The branches are completely different, but it seems like the punishment is still the same if you get one of those. So general, no GI Bill. So this veteran might have, or service member might have done something, nothing even close to this one, but neither one of them are gonna be able to use the GI Bill. And I don't understand how there's no list. I know it's based on your command, which is very subjective, right? Is that the word? And how they feel about you. That doesn't make any sense to me. But I'm just extremely happy for you all and other folks that help veterans with discharge upgrades. So now let's really talk about what is a discharge upgrade. Maybe, Jane, can we start with you, Jane?
Sure. So a discharge upgrade is basically a request to the Department of Defense, and each branch of the military service has their own discharge review boards and boards that look at these, but it's a request to change the person's DD-214. So whatever discharge status they received, they can request to upgrade that. They can also request to change certain things that are on their DD-214, like the reason they were discharged, their reenlistment code, as Ezekiel talked about at the beginning, things like that. That's basically what it is.
And Caitlin, talk to us about what is the DD-214? We're focused a lot on this document and getting something changed here. What is it? Why is it important? I mean, is it better to just leave it alone? Why even go through this process?
Yeah, so the DD-214 is the certificate of release from active duty service. So every veteran who has active duty time will receive at least one DD-214. This applies to those who are activated during their reserve time as well. They should also receive DD-214s, even if it's for a small period of time. And that document is essentially the proof that you served. You will probably walk out of the military with a huge stack of paper of all the things you did and accomplished, or all the notes ever taken about you. But the one document in there that they tell you to make 5 copies of is that DD-214. And that can be used to, like I said, verify military service. So for example, in future employment, for benefits, for state benefits, a lot of individual states like the state of California offer specific tax benefits to veterans. All of those things require some kind of proof of service, which is what the DD-214 is usually used for. The problem is that at the bottom of the DD-214 is basically an overview of your service, where it contains the things that Jane was talking about changing. So that character of service, that honorable, general, other than honorable, bad conduct, or dishonorable, a re-enlistment code like Ezekiel was talking about. And then where I see a lot of problems is the narrative reason for separation, which is basically a very brief 3-word summary of what led to your discharge. So sometimes we'll see things like serious misconduct, separation in lieu of trial, serious misconduct, drug abuse, or pattern of misconduct. There'll be all kinds of things on there, which are all really derogatory. And if you had to give that to verify employment, or give that to anyone who you maybe didn't want to share that part of your life with, you now have to kind of use that form and hope that they don't hold that against you. So that's what the DD-214 is, and that's why that particular document is really important, because it's essentially a summary of somebody's entire military career and service.
Yeah, got it. And you're, just to drive that point home, is you're having to show this document everywhere you go, anytime you want access to a benefit. So a veteran over the span of their lifetime is having to pull this document out and show it multiple times to different people.
That's the most important document that most of us own as veterans, right? I can imagine, I'm hoping there's veterans watching today that need assistance with the discharge upgrade. But do they know that they're gonna, how soon before they're getting out do they know, like, I'm gonna get a discharge, I'm gonna get an other than honorable, I should probably figure something out or talk to somebody? Is that even a process in the military?
In the words of every lawyer, it depends.
It depends. All right.
So yeah, it really depends. I've seen cases where the discharge process will take 18 months, and I've seen cases where they get, a 10-day letter, and it's going to be a really quick turnaround. But certainly once they get a notification of separation proceedings, that's going to tell them kind of the worst case scenario. And then there's going to be recommendations made after that by their command, whether that recommendation is, let's go with the worst case scenario, or, it wasn't as bad, let's go with a general. But certainly they should start preparing. If you are feeling you're going to get administratively separated against your will, certainly worth getting your documents together. There's not necessarily a whole lot you can do. You can't hire an attorney to help with an administrative separation, but basically kind of preparing yourself for after the fact, which just includes, like I said, getting documents together, keeping your records, keeping 5 copies of that DD-214 when you do get it.
Deepa, there was a couple of terms mentioned I'm hoping you can give us some clarification on. So Caitlin mentioned administrative separation, and she also mentioned discharge review board. Can you explain to us what those terms mean?
Sure.
Yeah. Sorry, Deepa,
Oh,
go
no,
ahead.
Caitlin, go ahead.
So an administrative separation is where you are administratively separated from the military. That's where your command has that discretion. You're not being taken to a court-martial. Depending on the time, length of time you have in service, you may be entitled to an administrative separation board with counsel. Some who've served, and I don't want to be quoted on exactly the number of years, but some who have served less will not get the benefit of that full board. And then discharge review board is the first level of review for each of the branches in the Department of Defense when they're looking at these discharges.
So for veterans sitting at home that may be seeking assistance, how long do they have after they've gotten out and received that other non-honorable? What's the statute of limitations on correcting this? On any of
Yeah,
it? Maybe they're
great question.
different between different levels of. Go ahead, Deepa. Thank you.
Yes, you're correct. So there are statutes of limitations that do apply, but what is positive, sorry, I'm a little difficult to see right now. What's important to realize is that in the current iteration of these boards, either there's another board you can apply to, or they're waivable statutes of limitations. So mostly what we'll say to a veteran who comes in the door is we're going to find a way to have a board look at your application. So the first, Jane mentioned that each branch, except the Navy and the Marine Corps, share their discharge review boards. Each of the branches has at least two, some have more, boards that hear these applications for a discharge upgrade. When a veteran says, I want something on my DD 214 changed. And the first is the Discharge Review Board. So if it's the Navy or Marine Corps, for example, it'll be the Naval Discharge Review Board. They have a very hard 15-year statute of limitations, and that's 15 years from the date of discharge. That is not waivable. There's really no way around that. So what's nice there is that if you are able to get an application into those boards, you can have up to 2 opportunities at review. The first is a record review, and then if you're not happy with how that goes, you can ask for a personal hearing, and a lot of the boards now offer telephonic or virtual hearings, so you don't have to worry about travel to DC or things like that. Now, the important thing there is if you ask for a personal hearing on the first go around with the Discharge Review Board, then that's your one opportunity. So we usually recommend to veterans, especially if they're many years out from 15 years from their discharge, ask for a record review first and then ask for the personal hearing if you need it. Now, say you're a Vietnam era vet, many years beyond 15 years from discharge, for example, you would be applying then to a board for correction of military or naval records, again, depending on your branch of service. And they do have a statute of limitations. It's 3 years from the discovery of error or injustice, which is, a lot of legal lingo. But what is important to know there is just ask them to waive their statute of limitation. Say that it's in the interest of justice, explain that you didn't know about the process, you never had the opportunity to talk to an attorney, you had other difficult circumstances going on in your life, and for any of those reasons, however simple, however complicated, ask that they waive the statute of limitations. And generally what we see is that the current iteration of the boards, they will do that. They'll go ahead and review the discharge upgrade application to decide if it's in the interest of justice, which means you get it reviewed. So you shouldn't worry too much that, I'm so far out, how can I really fix this now? Or how can I approach this problem now? The boards are there and available.
I would just add on that, really quickly. Some veterans, especially those who have been out for a while, have made previous applications or multiple applications to the board. Starting in 2016, you saw a really big shift in the guidance that was given to the boards. It was kind of crystallized through 2017, 2018. And those who had not applied under those new guidelines, we call it the CURTA memo, are eligible for applying again to the Board for Correction of Military Records if they're outside that 15 years to get a new review based on the new guidance that's been given. So even if you've applied before prior to that guidance coming out and you were denied, it is always worth looking at whether or not you can apply again to see if you can get the benefit of that guidance.
And Jane, how far can a character of discharge be upgraded? And to our entire panel here, can you share a story of when you, if it's possible, have you taken someone from something, as egregious as a dishonorable discharge? Can you go all the way to an honorable discharge?
I've personally never seen someone with a totally dishonorable discharge. I think that's quite rare. We have seen people with bad conduct discharge, which is the next step up. And that does mean that they were court-martialed and got that discharge that way.
What are the most common types of discharge upgrades? Are they from other than honorable to general, or BCD to other than honorable?
So I will say we have seen that the boards do have a tendency to rely on partial relief. That does happen where you'll see someone with a bad conduct discharge. And I have seen changes from bad conduct to honorable, but I would say maybe more frequently we do see someone who's able to get a discharge upgrade from a bad conduct or an other than honorable to a general. That also has huge implications on access to benefits, on how a veteran might feel about showing their DD-214 throughout their life. But I will also note that I've certainly seen other than honorable discharges get upgraded to fully honorable with changes to narrative reason for separation, to RE code. So we want to emphasize that the possibility is there. It is, it's worth advocating for yourself and learning more about the process and taking that step if, you take issue with your discharge and your DD-214 or the discriminatory information that might be on there. But yes, it's good to be aware that not everyone receives, what we call full relief or everything that you want. The other place that we sometimes see a challenge is a request for an upgrade from a general to an honorable. I think that there can be a misunderstanding that because this isn't a punitive discharge, maybe there was some minor misconduct, so they decided, okay, we're not going to, discharge you with a fully honorable discharge. That the boards might say, oh, well, nothing that bad happened. Why shouldn't this just be an honorable discharge? And again, we work with a lot of those veterans who are looking for that relief, and that's their situation. What's important to know there is that you want to, as we talk about what an application can include, you want it to be just as robust, just as full of important facts and context and supporting evidence and letters of support, even if you're thinking, oh, I'm just going from a general to an honorable, because the boards look at that and honestly, in their minds, they often think, well, that's not a punitive discharge. What's really the harm of having a general on your DD-214? You still have access to so many benefits. So you really still want to be making, strong arguments about why this is unfair, what impact it's had on you. And we'll talk about, I'm sure we'll talk about this a little bit later, but the other piece that comes to mind for me here is the importance of adding information on your post-service life as well. That's something that seems very odd. I think a lot of times you wouldn't expect that that's important, that the board would care, that what does that have to do with my service? That's what my discharge was based off of, right, is my service. So why would a board be looking at my post-service life? So I'm sure we'll get into more detail about that, but that's another important piece. If, whether you have a punitive discharge and you're thinking, oh, will they really, move from another, bad conduct to an honorable, or you have a general discharge and you're thinking, well, are they going to move a general to an honorable? Your post-service life and talking about that is all really important too.
Excellent information, Deepa, in terms of how to be prepared for this process and how to have the most robust argument as you're facing this challenge. We're going to take a brief break, but when we return, we'll conclude our conversation about discharge upgrades, so stay with us.
Honestly, I'm not really sure why I'm calling. It's just...
I'm having nightmares.
My husband and I, we're just fighting a lot.
I can't get any sleep.
Things just keep getting worse, and it's starting to feel like I can't do this by myself anymore.
We could use some help figuring things out.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you called. Why don't you tell me more about what's going on? There's no wrong reason to reach out for crisis support. Whatever you're going through, the Veterans Crisis Line is here to help. Visit veteranscrisisline.net to learn more.
Welcome back to Veterans Voices. We're talking about filing an application for discharge upgrade. We've got an excellent panel with us today. Team, why don't we talk first about what are the instances that completely bar you from VA benefits? Let's get those out of the way up front. Deepa, can you start us off on this conversation?
Sure. What I think the important place to start in this conversation is that technically there's a way to advocate for yourself no matter the bar that the VA has decided applies to you. If they look at your discharge and the misconduct that led to discharge, and they're trying to categorize it. This is now talking about the character of discharge review process at the VA, not going to change your DD-214, but just the VA's way of, establishing eligibility for VA benefits. They look at kind of two major buckets, and is this misconduct, does it fall into a statutory bucket or does it fall into a regulatory bucket? And the big ones with the statutory bars are you were discharged through a general court-martial conviction, or you're a conscientious objector. And those are, again, circumstances that are very narrow, do not apply to a lot of veterans. But I will just briefly state that if that's your circumstance, it might be worth talking to an advocate or someone with more experience, with the VA, because technically, if you, they call it, if you were insane at the time of the misconduct that led to that, that's actually a way to argue that that bar does not apply to you. But I know that that language can be very weighted, can be very complicated. It brings to mind, all of our understanding around criminal law. And this is a different definition of insanity. So I just say that because I want folks to have heard these words. And if this is that narrow set of circumstances that applies to you, that you fall under a statutory bar, specifically some of those, and maybe Caitlin or Jane will talk about other statutory or regulatory bars, that is still worth having a conversation with someone maybe who has more understanding of VA processes, so that they can unravel if the facts of your situation, that maybe there's a way to make some arguments to the VA that these bars should not apply, that you should still be eligible for VA benefits.
I want to kind of get this in the simplest form we can think of. There's discharge upgrades, which change your DD-214, right? And then there's character of discharge upgrades. I want you guys to explain it so we can, if I'm a veteran, I just want VA healthcare. I don't care what my DD-214 says. I need VA healthcare. Where's the line, and how can we talk about which one, the difference really?
Yeah. Oh, Jane, go ahead.
Go ahead, Jane.
Okay, thank you. So character of discharge determination with the VA is a whole separate process. It's not like the discharge upgrade with the Department of Defense. It's completely separate from that. It does not change your DD-214. You still have that document the same, but it does give you access to VA benefits such as health care, service-connected disability compensation, and a lot of the other benefits as well that come with that. So basically, the VA looks at the circumstances surrounding your discharge and makes a decision that says, even though you have this less than honorable discharge, we think you're okay for VA purposes, and we're going to give you these benefits. It's a process that most veterans that I've talked to are completely unaware of. It can be a little bit faster and easier than a full discharge upgrade. So we often, at least in our office, will do the character of discharge determination first. And you can do both at the same time if you have the energy and if you want to prepare those two applications at the same time, because as I said, they're separate processes. So the character of discharge determination with the VA is a really great way to get those benefits that you're not currently able to get with your discharge status.
That was an excellent breakdown, Jane. Thank you for that. Caitlin, can you talk to us about what are some of the common circumstances where someone will come in and you'll say, you know what, we're going to do a character of discharge determination versus with the VA versus a discharge upgrade with the Department of Defense in your branch? If you have a story that you can share with us or an example.
Yeah, this used to be a really common conversation that we would be having at Veterans Legal Institute, because we had a discharge upgrade team and a veterans benefits team, and it was sort of who's going to take what piece and when. And sort of the overarching idea was that character of service determinations, like Jane said, are typically faster. When you're looking at a discharge upgrade from the military, depending on what board you're at, you can be looking at anywhere from 6 to 48 months. The Army boards are taking 2 to 3 years, 2 to 4 years in some cases to make these decisions. So when you're looking at a client, like the example that you gave, where they just want access to healthcare, there is really no reason to put them through a 4-year waiting period to get that healthcare. So that character of service determination through the VA is going to be a much faster and better process. The other thing that's changed kind of the calculation and how you're making that decision recently is the guidance that the VA is using to make a determination for those character of service cases. It used to be that there were really only a few options, like the insanity argument that Deepa brought up earlier, and only certain people could access this idea of compelling circumstances, specifically those who had been AWOL or had been absent without leave for more than 180 days, so 6 months. Anyone under that didn't get access to compelling circumstances, but now they've widened the group of veterans who can access the compelling circumstances guidance, and therefore can get better options and usually relief at the VA as opposed to going to a discharge upgrade. So when we're making that decision, it really depends on the client's immediate goals, the client's determination and resilience, because sometimes these things, like I said, can take years, and sometimes it's going to take multiple applications. I had a client once who we decided, you know what, let's just go for all of it at the same time. We worked together as both of our teams. He ended up getting his character of service determination hearing and his discharge upgrade hearing all within the same month after waiting like 2.5 years for both of them. And he was granted both. He got his character of service determination later that week, said he's honorable for VA purposes, and then a few months later got an honorable on his DD-214. So, another calculation is if you get an honorable for VA purposes, you can use that as evidence when you're applying for a discharge upgrade. So you can say the VA found me honorable for VA purposes. You also can be using treatment records and VA decisions to help determine the severity of your mental health condition. When you're looking at the likelihood of getting a discharge upgrade, in terms of if a veteran is making that decision for themselves, it really comes down to what are your priorities. If you are really worried about that DD-214, a character of service determination is not going to change that. It's going to open up doors for you, but it's not necessarily going to remove all of the hurdles and barriers. So it can be worth looking at both. And like Jane said, you can do both at the same time. So if you've got immediate concerns and more long-term concerns, you can get both of those applications in, and the character of service determination will probably come back first, get access to that VA care, and now you can, use that evidence in your discharge upgrade application, which may still be pending.
We should definitely get into what to include in your application for a discharge upgrade. I think we have veterans watching right now. We always, as VSOs, say, hey, before you come into our office, we want you to have this paper, and this paper, so you're not, doing that. So what should they be gathering? What should they be thinking about? I know people are Googling and things like that, but the Google, I know, Deepa, you said the 15 years for some, it's maybe a hard stop, but we don't want people to stop. So I want people to be prepared. I want them to contact you all. But what should they be preparing now before they filed the discharge upgrade?
So we mentioned the idea of compelling circumstances, and this is a part of the VA process, but it's also, submit a lot of the same evidence or the same idea for the discharge upgrade process as well. And the guidance and the regulations say that compelling circumstances are things that both the VA and the discharge review boards have to consider when they review these things. And they can include mental health and mental impairment, assault and trauma, and overseas hardship and personal obligations, and really just all of the all the circumstances that explain and clarify and maybe mitigate the things that happened at the end of someone's service that their commanders thought were misconduct and needed to be punished, right? So we always, for both of these processes, do a personal statement and help the veteran write that up and include the most important things, really telling their story about what they were going through at that time and how difficult it was and their mental health symptoms and how they felt like they couldn't, that they might not have had a choice or they might have been too afraid to report what was really going on. All of those things we put in a personal statement. We can include statements from people who knew them at the time and could see the change in them and their behavior and what was going on with them. And all of that is really important to consider, telling your story and putting that information in front of the VA or the discharge review boards to consider and really show mercy, I would say, and have some compassion for what the person was experiencing at that time that may have led them to whatever ended their service.
Thank you, Jane. I want to ask anyone on the team here. So I'm a veteran and I've watched this show and I've decided I'm going to move forward with this process. How can I find an advocate, and what is it that I should be looking for when I'm searching for my advocate? What are your key points for our vets?
I mean, I think one of the things I was going to mention is DEPA's organization, Swords to Plowshares, has put together a really great self-help guide for veterans who kind of want to take a look at it initially and see, is this something I can navigate on my own, or do I want an advocate? When it comes to actually getting an advocate, I think, making sure that you're working with an organization that has its credentials, that you're working with attorneys, if you're looking for the VA process, making sure that the attorneys that you're working with are accredited. The VA has an accreditation process that anyone working with the VA has to go through. So making sure that you're working with somebody who's actually out there doing that, because there are people out there doing veterans work that are not accredited. I think connecting with your local veteran service office as well, your veteran service organization can be a good starting point to figure out what organizations are they working with. Do they have a direct referral process that will allow you to connect with your VSO and then connect with the legal aid? That can be a really good way of creating those connections.
So how about veterans who have passed away and their dependents? They know they want to go and fix their mother or fathers or their husband, sister, brother, whatever it may be. Is there a process for that? And could they be entitled to VA benefits that they would not have been, or they were not, due to the other honorable discharge?
Yes, I will say, just the other day, a family member called me asking, really their goal was to be able to have their now deceased brother have access to burial benefits. And the discharge review boards, the applications, you can fill them out as a next of kin. And you really want to think about putting together an application in the same way that a veteran would, which means, you want to fill out the application form, the appropriate one, for the correct discharge review, board at the Department of Defense. You want to include your deceased family members DD 214. You want to go ahead and try and request their military records, which is also something you can do as a next of kin, so that you can look through there and see if there's anything to point out, maybe in the medical records. There's reference to some mental health symptoms that, now it's apparent that's what that was, or you want to point out some really good facts about their service, maybe, lists of awards or good commendations that show up in their records. And then, yes, like Jane said, we normally have a personal statement, right, that we would encourage veterans to write when they're submitting their application. What you can do as a family member is, the way I describe it is like you can tell the story of your family member the best you can from what you saw, what you observed. But you also have all these records, and maybe you have post-service medical records. Maybe you have letters of support from family or other family, friends, supervisors in their work. maybe you have copies of certificates, they got a particular license, they, got a certain accreditation or degree during their lifetime. You can go ahead as a next of kin and collect all that information. And then when you're writing that persuasive statement saying, here's why it's unfair that my, brother or sister or, father, never was able to, have a DD-214 that said honorable or that really reflected their service or their commitment or their sacrifice. And now they never received benefits in life. And now, they can't, perhaps can't be buried with the honors that they should be. You can use all those pieces of information along with what you know about their story and what you saw and observed of them to kind of write a really persuasive statement about why it's unfair that this is the discharge that your family member has on their DD-214. And a lot of folks, after the fact, they do find it to be, it was described to me as like, this is the last thing that I can do for this person I love. And I think that is, such a wonderful way to think about it. And really to realize that you still have a lot of tools in your toolkit. You still have a lot of resources and materials that you can rely on to really paint this picture of this life of service, during their military service, but also the life that they created after their service, and what a contribution that was to their community. And so, yes, I think for a lot of folks, that is an important thing to know, that is still available to you.
I love that message of hope there. That is going to be our discussion today. I want to thank all of our guests for showing up and having this discussion. Please keep in mind your discharge status is not written in stone. It can be changed. It may take a little work, but it could help you gain access to benefits that you have earned and deserve. We hope that you found our conversation educational. We leave you with some resources if you want to dig a little deeper. The Department of Veterans Affairs is a good place to start. Go to va.gov and look for Records section to find your military records. Department of Defense has information and resources. Go to defense.gov and do a search for Discharge Upgrades. Swords to Plowshares offers legal help for veterans to navigate the discharge upgrade process. Find them at swords-to-plowshares.org or call 415-727-8387. The Veterans Legal Institute is another legal resource for veterans, and you can find them at vetslegal.org. In Sonoma County, Legal Aid of Sonoma County helps veterans in this process. Reach them at legalaidsc.com. To rewatch today's episode, check back on our homepage later this week or check your cable provider's schedule for rebroadcast times. You can also rewatch this episode and many others on our YouTube channel, Veterans Voices of Contra Costa, so be sure to subscribe. Scan the QR code on your screen to find us on all of our social media. Our next show is going to air on Wednesday, April 9th at noon. We'll be discussing another topic important to the veterans community, and you won't want to miss it. To all of our veterans and their families, thank you for serving. To all of you who tuned in, thanks for watching and have a great day.